The wind in the Arizona territory did not whisper. It scoured. It came from a place of iron and dust, carrying the grit of landscapes that had never known softness. It scraped across the cracked alkali flats, whistled through the brittle skeletons of mesquite, and sang a low, hollow note over the abandoned mining tracks that scarred the hillsides. Those tracks, rusting and warped, were a monument to failure, laid down by men who had come for silver and left with nothing but empty pockets and lung fever. This was a land of immense, crushing distance. The horizon was not a promise. It was a judgment. It pressed in on all sides, a ring of hazy purple mountains that seemed to observe, without pity, the slow death of the land below. The sun was not a gentle warmth. It was a hammer, beating the dry washes into powder and baking the earth into a surface as hard and unforgiving as fired brick. In the center of this isolation lived Elijah. His farm was not really a farm. It was a testament to stubbornness, a collection of weathered gray buildings slowly surrendering to the elements. His corn, planted in hope 3 months prior, stood no higher than a man's knee. The leaves yellowed and rattling. The creek, which his deed had promised was year-round, had slowed to a muddy trickle, barely enough for his 2 bony mules and a handful of chickens. Elijah matched his land. He was a pale man, his skin bleached rather than browned by the sun, as if the light merely reflected off him. His hair was the color of dried straw. He had once been strong, but loss had whittled him down, leaving him quiet and worn, like a harness left too long in the sun. He moved with a deliberate slowness, as if conserving an energy he knew would never be replenished. He was a man haunted, and the ghost had a name: Sarah. Her grave was 50 yards from the cabin, beneath the only truly healthy thing on the property, a sprawling willow tree. Its roots had found the deep water that eluded his crops, and it grew with a lush, almost insolent greenness. He hated the tree for its vitality. He cherished it for shading her. He had buried her there himself. 5 years ago, he had built the small wooden cross, and he had carved her name into it. He had not spoken more than 100 words in a single day since. He avoided the town of Purgatory Flats, 10 miles to the east. He went only when salt or flour or lamp oil became a necessity. And even then, he kept his head down. He bartered what little he could, a few eggs, a well-mended tool, and endured the looks. They were looks of pity, which felt like acid, or of suspicion, which felt like stones. He was the silent man, the widower, the failure whose fields turned to dust. He trusted no one, and sought the company of nothing but the wind. Miles away, in the labyrinth of red rock canyons, another survivor watched the same relentless sun. Her name was Sani. She lived in the cliffs, in the shallow caves and overhangs where the ancient ones had left their handprints on the stone. She moved through the landscape like a shadow, not a part of it, but unseen within it. She hunted rabbits with a throwing stick, snared lizards, and knew which roots held water and which held poison. She hid from the blue-coated soldiers who patrolled the territory, men who saw her as vermin to be exterminated or relocated. She hid from the settlers and prospectors, men who saw her as something less than human, something to be used. Sani survived. That is what she did. Her eyes were sharp, missing no movement, the shift of a hawk's wing, the tremor of a snake under a rock. But they were tired. It was a weariness that went bone deep, the exhaustion of a creature that could never truly rest. She carried her own ghosts, not in the ground, but on her skin. Beneath the coarse linen shirt she had taken from a washing line, her back bore a latticework of old scars. They were pale now, thin as thread, but they mapped a history of conversion and civilization. They were the faint, precise lines of a horsewhip, delivered by the righteous hands of the men at the missionary encampment who had sought to save her soul by breaking her body. One morning, just as the sky was turning from gray to a pale, bruised pink, Elijah noticed the intrusion. He was walking to the chicken coop, his movements stiff in the dawn chill. A section of his flimsy barbed wire fence was pushed down, not broken, but deliberately lowered. He stopped. The air, usually still at this hour, felt suddenly charged. He scanned the hills, seeing nothing but rock and shadow. In the coop, There was a scattering of feathers and the agitated clucking of the remaining hens. 3 were missing. He knelt by the fence post. The ground was hard, but he found them. Tracks, not the sharp, deep print of a cavalry boot, nor the chaotic scramble of a coyote. These were small, shallow impressions. A moccasin, worn thin. He stood, his hand rubbing the grit from his chin. He felt a cold knot in his stomach. It was not anger. It was a weary dread. He looked toward the canyons, the direction the tracks led. He could follow them. He owned a Winchester rifle, and he knew how to use it. He had hunted deer. He could hunt a thief. He stood there for a full minute. Then, he let out a long, slow breath. He turned his back on the tracks. He would not investigate further. He would not invite violence into his fragile, empty peace. The hens were gone. It was just another thing taken. He would spend the morning repairing the fence. For weeks, Sonny had watched him. She had seen him from the ridge, a solitary figure moving between the cabin and the dying fields. She watched him speak to his mules, his voice low and calm. She watched him stand by the willow tree, his head bowed, doing nothing for long stretches of time. She saw the way he moved, without suddenness, without aggression. She saw that no one visited him. She saw the riders from the town pass his turnoff without slowing. She saw a man who, like her, was separate, a man who was hollowed out, who posed no threat because the world had already done its worst to him. She had seen him leave a small sack of cornmeal by the fence post after finding her tracks. He had not shouted. He had not come with a gun. He had left an offering. She made her choice. One evening, the sun was bleeding out, staining the western clouds a deep, painful crimson. Elijah was on his porch, cleaning the soot from a lantern globe, when he felt the change in the air. The crickets stopped. He looked up. She was standing in his field. She had not been there a moment before, and now she was. She stood between 2 rows of withered corn, perhaps 30 yards away. She was unarmed. She wore the tattered linen shirt and a deerskin skirt. She was thin, her collarbone sharp beneath her copper skin, but she held herself with an unbent pride. Her black hair was tied back, and her face was still carved from the same red rock as the canyons. Elijah's hand froze on the lantern. His heart gave a single, painful kick against his ribs. Apache. He stayed perfectly still, his mind racing. Was she a decoy? Were there others in the brush? He scanned the perimeter, the creek bed, the shadows by the barn. Nothing, only her. She took 1 step forward, then another. She stopped, keeping a safe distance. Elijah slowly rose to his feet, letting the rag fall from his hand. He did not reach for the rifle leaning just inside the door. Her stillness told him this was not an attack. He expected her to gesture, to ask for food or water in sign language. Instead, she spoke. Her voice was soft, lower than he expected, and it carried the faint, formal cadence of missionary schooling. The English was perfect and chilling. "I want a child from you." The words hung in the vast, dry air. Elijah stared, unable to process them. It was not a request he could understand. It was a sentence from a different world. He thought he must have misheard, that the wind had twisted the words. She did not repeat herself. She just watched him, her dark eyes holding no plea, no shame, and no fear. He felt a sudden, dizzying panic. This was an intrusion deeper than stolen hens. This was madness. He took a clumsy step back, his boot heel hitting the cabin's threshold. He fumbled for the door latch, his eyes never leaving her. "No," he whispered. It was a dry, cracking sound. He scrambled inside, pulling the heavy door shut. He heard the wooden bar slide into its bracket with a solid thud. His heart was pounding so hard it hurt his chest. He leaned against the door, breathing in the close, dusty air of his home. He moved to the small window, peering through a crack in the curtains. She had not moved. She stood in the dying light, a solitary, unmoving figure. She did not approach the cabin. She did not call out. She simply waited, as if she had all the time in the world. Then, As the last light vanished and the landscape dissolved into shades of indigo and black, she turned. She did not look back. She walked soundlessly back toward the creek and disappeared into the shadows. Elijah did not light the lantern. He sat in the darkness, the rifle across his lap, and waited. He did not sleep that night. He lay on his cot, staring at the ceiling beams, and listened to the silence. But the silence was not empty. It was filled with the memory of her words, and those words unlocked a door in his mind he had kept bolted for 5 years. He was back in this room, but it was not dark. It was bright with lamplight and terror. The air was thick with the smell of sweat, fear, and iron. Sarah was on the cot. Her face was pale and slick, her hair plastered to her skull. She was screaming. It was a sound he had never heard from her, a raw animal noise that tore at the fabric of the world. The midwife, Mrs. Gable, was shouting at her, "Push, child! Bear down!" But Sarah was beyond hearing. She was thrashing, her eyes wide and white. "It's stuck! Elijah! It's stuck! Make it stop!" He was holding her hand, his own trembling so badly he could barely grip hers. "I'm here. Sarah, I'm here." He felt so useless, a large, clumsy man in a room where a terrible, bloody miracle was failing. "The shoulders," the midwife muttered, her face grim. "It ain't turning." He saw the blood. It was not a normal amount. It was too much. It soaked the sheets, pooled on the floorboards. It was dark and terrible. "Sarah!" he yelled, trying to pull her back from the panic. Her screaming stopped. It simply cut off. Her body went limp, her head falling to the side. Her eyes were open, staring at the wall. "Sarah!" The midwife was frantic, pulling at the sheets, her hands covered in blood. "Lost her! Oh, God! Lost her!" A moment later, a small, blue-tinged body was pulled free, lifeless, silent. Elijah had backed away, stumbling, his hands sticky with his wife's blood. He had looked at the tiny, perfect, stillborn boy. He had looked at his wife's empty stare, and he had felt his own life drain out of him, leaving nothing behind but a hollow, guilty shell. Now, lying in the same room. He squeezed his eyes shut. The woman in the field had not asked for food. She had asked for that. She had asked for death. She had asked him to bring that horror back into his house. His body shook. He would shoot her if she came back. He would warn her off. He would not be the cause of that again. 3 days passed. Elijah worked with a grim, frantic energy. He reinforced the chicken coop. He carried his rifle everywhere. He saw shadows in the rocks and heard voices in the wind. He was jumpy, irritable, and more tired than ever. He saw no sign of her. He began to believe it had been a hallucination, a phantom brought on by the heat and the isolation. On the 4th day, he took his mules to the creek. The water was low, and he had to dig out a small hollow for it to pool. As he knelt by the muddy bank, he sensed her. He looked up. She was on the other side of the creek, not 20 feet away. She was kneeling, just as he was, holding a small clay pot, waiting for the water to clear. She was calm. She did not look startled. She looked as if she belonged there. Elijah's first instinct was to stand, to shout, the words he had rehearsed. "Leave, go away, I'll shoot," died in his throat. He stayed kneeling. The rifle was back at the cabin. He was vulnerable, but she made no threatening move. She simply dipped her pot into the water. He watched her. She was patient. She let the pot fill slowly, avoiding the mud. He found his voice. It was hoarse, rough from disuse. "What you said. You were wrong to say it." She did not look up, but she paused. "It was not wrong. It was truth." "You don't know what you're asking for." His voice trembled, thick with the memory of the blood. "It's death. It's only death." She slowly raised her head. Her eyes met his across the shallow water. There was no pity in her gaze. There was only a deep, weary understanding. "I want a child." She said it again, not as a question, not as a demand, as a fact. The simplicity of it broke through his fear. It left only confusion. He stood up, wiping his muddy hands on his trousers. "Why?" he asked. It was the only word he had left. Why me? Why this? Sani rose to her feet, holding the pot of water carefully. She looked at him, at his failing farm, at his worn clothes, at the profound sadness that clung to him like dust. She spoke, and her words were stones dropping into a deep well. Because I choose. She held his gaze, letting the words settle. Not because they take. Elijah flinched, as if she had struck him. He knew exactly who they were. Soldiers, priests, the men at the encampments, the men who had left the scars he could not see. She was not asking for death. She was not asking for a husband. She was asking for the one thing that had been stolen from her. A choice. She was taking back her own body, her own future, from a world that had tried to erase her. She was making something that was entirely hers, not something forced upon her by violence. He had no answer for that. He watched her turn and walk away, her back straight, carrying the heavy pot of water as if it weighed nothing at all. A new tension began. It was not the tension of fear, but of something else, something raw and unnamed. He did not see her for 2 days. Then, in the evening, she was there again. Not in the field, but sitting on the ground near the wood pile, a safe distance from the porch. Elijah came out and sat on his steps. Neither spoke for a long time. The sun set, the air grew cool. The corn is dying, he said finally, just to break the silence. The water's too deep, she replied. Her voice was just a low murmur. You dig in the wrong place. It's the only place it runs. It runs underground, she said. By the willow. He looked at the willow. At Sarah's grave. I can't dig there. No, she agreed. They sat in the growing dark. He felt an urge to offer her food, to offer her shelter, but he remembered her eyes. She was not asking for his pity. She had come for a single, terrifying purpose, and she would not accept charity. He would not offer it. His grief was his own, a heavy cloak he refused to set down. Her pain was hers, a fire he had no right to douse. But as the days passed, this silent ritual continued. He would work. She would appear at dusk. They would sit, separated by 30 yards of dust and shadow. Sometimes they spoke. He asked her how she knew English. She said, "The men in black robes." She asked him why he stayed. He said, "I have nowhere else to go." They were two broken, solitary people, speaking in fragments across a divide. He did not trust her. She did not trust him. But beneath the surface, something was stirring. It was the first human contact he had willingly endured in 5 years. It was the first white man she had ever approached by choice. It was raw. It was impossible. And it was beginning to feel as necessary as the water she carried from his creek. It was 2 nights later when he spoke of it. The air was cool, and the sliver of a moon offered just enough light to make the world a place of silver and black. He sat on the porch step. She sat, as she often did, near the woodpile, just outside the faint pool of lamplight from his window. "You asked me," he began, his voice rough. He cleared his throat and stared at his hands. "You asked for a child. I told you it was death. I should tell you why." Sani waited. The silence of the desert was her ally. She did not prod. She let him fight the words out. "I had a wife. Her name was Sarah." He said the name as if it were fragile, a piece of thin glass he had not touched in years. "She was from back east. Too soft for this place. I knew it. But I brought her here anyway. I thought I could build something." He swallowed, the memory rising in his throat like bile. "She wanted a child. I did, too. We were happy when we knew. We waited for 9 months. We painted the cradle. I built it. It's still in there." He gestured vaguely toward the cabin, then let his hand drop. "The labor started," he said, his voice lowering to a strained whisper. "It was early. The midwife, Mrs. Gable, she came. But it was wrong. It was all wrong from the start." He was trembling. It started in his hands and moved up his arms. A fine, violent tremor. She was screaming. Not like a person. And there was too much blood. The midwife, She tried, but the child wouldn't turn. It was stuck. Sarah, she just stopped. Her eyes were open, but she was gone. She bled out on that cot. He pointed at the wall of the cabin, at the room where he still slept. The midwife got the child out after a boy. He never cried. He was blue. He was perfect, but he never took a breath. I buried them both, out there. He nodded toward the willow tree, its branches swaying in the faint breeze. A big coffin, and a small one. I built them both. He finally looked at her, his eyes hollow and filmed with a shame that was 5 years old but still raw. So you see, you ask me for a child. You ask me to do that. I am the man who did that. I killed her. My wanting her. My touching her. It led to that. I swore I would never. Not again. I am not a man who makes life. I am a man who ends it. He finished. He was shaking, breathing hard, as if he had run a mile. He was rigid with the confession, waiting for her to recoil, to curse him, to leave. Sani sat in the darkness. She did not move. She did not look away. She did not offer him comfort. She did not say she was sorry. Her face was calm, unreadable. She simply listened. She accepted his story, his guilt and his terror, and she held it in the silence. She did not judge him. She knew what it was to be haunted. A night passed, then another. He worked his fields. She watched. On the third evening, she spoke. She offered her story as he had offered his. Not as a trade, as an exchange. They took me from my family when I was 11 summers, she said, her voice flat, recounting a history she had worn smooth. 11 years. The men in black robes. They said my mother was a heathen. They said I must be saved. She pulled at the rough sleeve of her linen shirt. They cut my hair. They put me in clothes like this. They washed me with soap that burned. They put a new name on me. Mary. I was Mary. She said the name as if it were a sickness. They taught me English. They taught me their book. She nodded toward the cabin, where she had seen his Bible on the shelf. They taught me to pray to their God, who was always angry. When I spoke my own words, they beat me. When I would not eat their food, they beat me. Elijah watched her. She was not asking for pity. She was stating facts. Then the soldiers came, the men in blue. They came to protect the mission for my people. The men in black robes praised them. They said the soldiers were the hand of civilization. Her voice went very quiet, very cold. The soldiers, they used the school, the older girls, in the storerooms, in the stables. The men in black told us to be grateful. They said we were learning to be useful to white men. Elijah felt a cold sickness in his stomach. He looked away, at the dark line of the canyons. One night, Sani continued, the oil shed caught fire. A lamp was knocked over. The men were shouting, running for water. The wooden gate was unbarred. She paused, and for the first time, a faint, hard tremor entered her voice. I did not run for water. I ran into the hills. I hid in the rocks. I ate lizards and roots. I remembered my name. I never went back. She finally looked at him, her eyes as sharp and hard as obsidian shards. They said I was dirty. They said I was a savage. They said I was less than a dog. She stood up, pulling the ragged shirt tight. Then they made me so. The words settled between them. His was a wound of failure, a private grief. Hers was a wound of theft, a public violation. Both had been broken by the world's righteous, heavy hands. The confessions changed the air. The distance between the porch and the woodpile was no longer empty. It was full of their shared ghosts. A new routine began, unspoken. One morning, Elijah came outside to find her in his garden patch, kneeling in the dirt, her hands rapidly and expertly pulling the tough weeds that choked his struggling beans. He stopped, watched her for a moment. Her movements were fluid, economical. She belonged to the earth in a way his plows and fences never would. He did not tell her to stop. He went to the barn and mended a harness. The next day, he took a small sack of flour and a tin of lard and left it on the flat rock by the creek bank where he knew she gathered water. He did not wait to see her take it. When he returned at dusk, it was gone. She continued to work the land. She showed him how to find the wetter soil near the willow by digging shallow, angled trenches, diverting the deep moisture without disturbing the grave. He left her eggs, a knife he had sharpened, and a small bar of soap. They worked, sometimes on opposite ends of the property, sometimes only yards apart. They moved in a silent, careful orbit. This fragile truce was broken by the outside world. Jebediah Slocum, a neighbor whose land bordered Elijah's to the east, rode up one afternoon. Jeb was a talker, a man who believed every silence was an invitation to fill it. "Elijah, still alive out here, I see," Jeb shouted, dismounting before Elijah had even reached him. Elijah merely nodded, gripping the axe handle in his hand. He had been splitting wood. "Jeb, hotter than the devil's forge, ain't it? My well is down 2 feet. 2 feet! If we don't get rain by month's end, I'm selling my stock for pennies." He spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. Elijah said nothing. He hated these visits. Jeb squinted, wiping his mouth. "Town's riled up. Heard some Apaches jumped a freight wagon near Tucson. Seems they're restless again." Elijah tensed. He glanced toward the creek, but Sandy was nowhere to be seen. But Jeb's eyes were sharp. He caught the flicker of movement in the brush near the willow tree. Sandy, checking a snare, had frozen. "What's that?" Jeb said, his hand instinctively moving to the pistol on his hip. "Coyote," Elijah said, his voice flat. "That ain't no coyote," Jeb said, stepping past Elijah. That's a person." He peered into the shadows. He could not see her clearly, just the impression of a figure, the darkness of her hair. "Good Lord, Elijah, you got someone hiding in the brush." Elijah stepped in front of him. "My land, Jeb." Jeb stared at him, his mouth open. Then he let out a low whistle. "Well, I'll be a squaw. You're keeping a squaw." He looked Elijah up and down, a new, sly understanding in his eyes. "That's what it is. Lord, I heard of men going native, but get off my land," Elijah said. The words were low, and they carried a weight that made Jeb take a step back. All right, Jeb said, raising his hands. "No need to get prickly. Just, folks ain't gonna like it. Elijah, they ain't gonna like it one bit." Jeb mounted his horse, gave one last look toward the willows, and rode off, kicking up dust. The whispers began 2 weeks later, the next time Elijah went to town. When he walked into the mercantile, the conversation stopped. Mr. Harris, the proprietor, weighed his flour in silence. "That'll be 40 cents, Harris said, not meeting his eye. As Elijah counted the coins, one of the men leaning by the stove, a rancher named Cole, spoke. "Heard you got yourself some unconventional help out at your place." Elijah ignored him, pocketing his change. "Heard you got one of them Apache women hid out," Cole pressed, louder. "Elijah's got a squaw hiding in the brush." Elijah turned. He said nothing. He just looked at them, his pale eyes flat and dead. The men shuffled, suddenly uncomfortable with the depth of the silence they had poked. He turned and walked out. The whispers followed him, biting at his back. The dust storm came at the end of the month. It was not a storm. It was an apocalypse. The sky turned a sickly, sulphurous yellow at noon. By 2 o'clock, it was as dark as midnight, and the wind began to scream. Elijah fought to get the mules into the barn, the air so thick with grit he could barely see his own hands. The wind tore at him, stinging his skin, filling his mouth and nose with sand. He stumbled back to the cabin, bandana pulled over his face, and fell inside, slamming the door against the howling darkness. He barred it. He leaned against it, coughing, trying to get the dust from his lungs. Then he realized she was still out there. He cursed, unbarring the door. He ripped it open, and the storm blasted into the room, a wave of sand and noise. "Sonny!" he roared into the brown fog. "Get in, now!" A figure materialized from the chaos, a ghost covered in silt. She stumbled past him, falling to her knees. He slammed the door shut, throwing his weight against it, and dropped the bar. The cabin was instantly plunged into darkness. The only sound was the wind, a high-pitched, maddening shriek, and the steady, sand-like hiss of dirt forcing its way through every crack in the walls. This was the first time she had been inside his home. He fumbled for the lantern, his hands shaking. He struck a match. The small flame wavered, then caught. The light illuminated a nightmare. The air was thick with brown dust. Silt was already coating the table, the floor, his cot. Sani was huddled by the door, her back to the wall. She was rigid, her eyes wide, listening to the world trying to tear the cabin apart. Elijah was jumpy. A heavy gust hit the chimney, and a shower of soot fell into the cold fireplace. He flinched. He saw her flinch, too, her hand tightening on her knee. They were trapped, two animals in a burrow, waiting for the earth to stop moving. The storm raged for hours. They did not speak. There was nothing to say. He sat at the table. She stayed by the wall. They listened to the roof groan. They breathed the thick, choking air. Slowly, as the night wore on, the screaming of the wind dropped to a low, guttural moan. The immediate violence had passed. In the suffocating silence, Elijah could hear her breathing. He could hear his own. She was trembling, a fine shiver, a reaction to the cold and the fear. He sat at the table, his body stiff. She uncurled slowly. Her movements were stiff. She rose, walked the few feet to the table, and stood beside him. He looked at her. Her face was a mask of dirt. She did not sit, she simply stood there, absorbing the faint warmth of the lantern. Then, with a slowness that felt monumental, she leaned. She rested her head and shoulder against his chest. The contact was a shock. It was the first time he had willingly felt another person's weight in 5 years. It was solid, it was warm, it was real. He could feel the slight tremor running through her. He smelled the dust in her hair, the faint, clean scent of sage beneath it. Elijah did not move. He did not breathe. He closed his eyes, his hand frozen on the table. He just let her stay, a small, solid weight against the emptiness he had carried for so long. A week later, the opposite of the dust arrived. The air grew heavy, humid, and electric. The sky turned a deep, bruised purple. Then it broke. A deluge, a thunderstorm that shook the very foundations of the hills. The rain came down not in drops, but in sheets. A tremendous crack of thunder rattled the cabin, followed immediately by the sound of splintering wood. Elijah was on his feet in an instant. "The barn roof! The patch!" He grabbed his oilcloth coat and ran into the deluge. He heard her footsteps right behind him. In seconds, they were soaked to the bone. The rain was cold, blinding. Lightning flashed, illuminating the barn. A large section of the old roof had torn loose, and water was pouring onto his precious store of hay. "The tarp!" he yelled over the roar of the storm. They ran inside. The barn was chaos, the mules kicking in their stalls. They grabbed the heavy oiled canvas and dragged it toward the ladder. It was a battle. The wind whipped the tarp, trying to tear it from their grasp. Elijah climbed the slick ladder, shouting commands. Sani, strong and fierce, pulled from below, anchoring the canvas as he fought to nail it down. Another flash of lightning. They were both plastered in mud, hair slicked to their skulls, water streaming from them. They finally secured the last corner. It was done. They stumbled back into the dry part of the barn, gasping, leaning against the stalls. Elijah fumbled with the lantern, his fingers numb. He lit it. The flickering, golden light pushed back the storm. He looked at her. She was dripping, shivering, her black hair plastered to her face. The thin linen shirt was soaked, clinging to her body. Through the wet cloth, he could see the pale, thin lines of the whip scars on her back and side. She was looking at him, not at his hands, not at the ground, at his face. He took a step. He was not thinking. He was moving. He reached out, his hand clumsy and covered in mud. He touched her cheek. His thumb brushed the water from her skin. She did not flinch. She did not pull away. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing for just a second. He leaned down. She rose slightly on her toes to meet him. The kiss was slow. It was hesitant. It was awkward. It tasted of rain and mud and the iron tang of the storm. It was not a kiss of passion, but of discovery. It was the tentative, testing touch of two people who had forgotten what comfort felt like. It was two wounded, half-wild creatures, testing to see if touch could be something other than pain. He pulled away first. The reality of what he had done hit him. He was trembling, the same violent shake that had taken him when he spoke of Sarah. "I can't," he whispered, his voice ragged. He backed away a step. "Sani, I can't. I told you, I'm the man who brings death. I'm poison." He looked terrified, ashamed. A man caught in a trap of his own memory. Sani watched him. Her face was calm. She saw his fear. She understood it. She took his trembling hand, his large, rough farmer's hand, which was shaking uncontrollably. She pulled it toward her. She did not place it on her breast. A gesture of seduction. She did not place it lower. An act of demand. She pressed his palm flat against her ribs, just below her heart. He could feel the solid cage of her bones. He could feel the steady, strong, slow beat of her heart. He could feel her breath, in and out. Life. She held his hand there, forcing him to feel it. "Not because you want to own me," she said, her voice low and steady in the lantern light, cutting through the sound of the rain. She held his gaze. "Only because you want to stay." She was not asking him to be a savior, or a husband, or a conqueror. She was not confusing this with love. She was separating the act from all the pain of his past, and all the violation of hers. It was not about ownership. It was not about failure. It was about choice. It was about staying. Elijah looked at his hand, flat against her side. He felt her breathing. He felt her heart. He gave a single, jerky nod. They stood like that for a long moment. Then, together, they walked back through the lessening rain to the cabin. That night, she slept on the quilt on the floor. He slept in his cot, but neither of them slept much at all. They lay in the darkness, listening to the drip of the rain from the eaves, and the quiet, steady sound of another person breathing in the room. The morning after the thunderstorm, the world was scrubbed clean. The air, washed of dust, was sharp and cool, and the sky was a deep, painful blue. Elijah rose from his chair. He had not slept. He looked at Sani, who was still wrapped in the dry quilt on the floor, her eyes open, watching him. The memory of the night before, the kiss in the barn, her hand on his, her heart beating against his palm, hung between them. A fragile, heavy thing. He turned from her and looked at the cot. His cot. Sarah's cot. It was the grave he slept in every night. It was the altar of his failure. He moved to it. He gripped the edge of the old, stained mattress. With a sudden, violent movement, he stripped the blankets from it, tearing the thin sheets he had not changed in months. He balled them up, threw them into the cold fireplace. He stood there, breathing hard, looking at the bare ticking. Sani rose silently. She watched him. He went to the small chest at the foot of the bed. Sarah's chest. He opened it. The smell of lavender and dried herbs, faint after 5 years, rose up. Inside, folded neatly, were her wedding sheets, fine linen, brought from back east, unused since her death. He took them out. His hands trembled. He unfolded them. They were white, clean, and cool to the touch. He began to make the bed. His movements were jerky, clumsy. He was a man fighting himself. He was burying his ghost, and the ghost was fighting back. When he was done, the cot looked different. It looked new and terrifying. He turned to Sani. He did not speak. He did not have to. He had made his choice. She came to him. She stood before him, her face unreadable, her eyes searching his. He was shaking. He was terrified. He was a man stepping off a cliff, not knowing if he would fall or fly. He reached for her, his hands rough and calloused. He touched her face, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw. She was so alive, it frightened him. He leaned in, and this time, the kiss was not rain and mud. It was hesitant, dry, and full of sorrow. It was the kiss of a man who had forgotten how. She led him to the cot. She did not pull. She simply moved, and he followed. It was slow. It was tender. It was charged with the weight of all the years they had spent repressed, grieving, and alone. When he touched her skin, he felt the thin, raised lines of her scars. He winced, his hand pulling back as if burned. She caught his hand. She held it. She pressed his palm flat against the scars on her ribs. She would not let him turn away from her past, just as she had not turned from his. He looked at her, his eyes full of a pain that was more than his own. This was the moment the past rose up to claim him. He saw Sarah. He saw the blood. He heard the screams. He felt the awful, final stillness of her hand in his. He was the man who brought death. He was poison. He pulled away from Sani, scrambling backward on the cot, his breath hitching. He put his face in his hands. A dry, terrible sound ripped from his throat, a sob he had held in for 5 years. He cried. He cried for his dead wife, for his dead son, for the barren land, and for the hollow man he had become. He wept from a place of such profound emptiness that it shook the small cabin. He was ashamed. He was weak. He waited for her to leave, to show him the disgust he felt for himself. He felt her move. She did not pull away. She moved closer. She put her hand on the back of his neck. Her touch was firm, grounded. She did not stroke him. She did not soothe him. She simply held him. An anchor. He felt her breath near his ear. She whispered, "I am not afraid of your sadness." The words cut through the storm in his mind. She was not afraid. She was not fragile. She was not Sarah. She was not pitying him. She was accepting him, all of him, the grief, the failure, the fear. He slowly raised his head. He looked at her through his tears. She was watching him, her gaze clear and deep. He reached for her again. This time, his hand was steady. The joining was not a fire. It was a joining of wounds. It was a slow, painful, and beautiful mending. It was 2 broken halves finding a way to be whole, if only for a moment. It was an act of profound, desperate, and defiant life, in the very room that death had claimed. In the days that followed, the farm changed. It was no longer just his, it was theirs. A new routine settled over them, as quiet and steady as the deep water Sani had known was there. They woke before the sun. Elijah no longer ate his bread standing by the stove. They sat at the small table. He would drink his coffee. She would drink a tea of herbs she gathered from the creek bed. They worked. He repaired the section of barn roof the storm had torn, the new wood shining pale against the weathered gray. Sani took charge of the 2 nanny goats he had kept, mostly for milk he barely used. He had always been clumsy with them, but she was not. She spoke to them in low, soft Apache words, and they stood calm for her, allowing her to milk them with a swift, practiced hand. She began making a soft, tart cheese, which she pressed and wrapped in leaves. The garden, under her care, began to flourish. The beans she had saved from the weeds began to climb. She had planted seeds of her own, seeds she had carried, and strange, hardy squashes began to grow, their vines snaking over the dry soil. Their silence deepened. It was no longer the empty, hollow silence of his grief, nor the watchful, guarded silence of her survival. It was a shared silence. It was the quiet of 2 people working in tandem, knowing where the other was without needing to look. He would be splitting wood, the rhythm of the axe a steady heartbeat, and she would be nearby, scraping a hide or grinding corn. Trust, he learned, was not a thing you declared. It was a thing you built, one day at a time. It was built in the sharing of food. It was built in the mending of a fence. It was built in the quiet of the night, lying on the cot, their bodies learning the shape of each other, finding warmth and stillness in the dark. The peace was fragile, and it existed only within the boundaries of his failed land. The world beyond was waiting. He needed supplies. The storm had ruined his last sack of flour, and he needed salt, lamp oil, and nails to finish the barn repair. He put it off for as long as he could. Finally, he harnessed the mules to the wagon. Sani watched him from the cabin door. He saw the tension in her. She said nothing, but her eyes were on the horizon, toward the town. "I will be back before dusk," he said. It was the first time he had ever felt the need to promise such a thing. "They will see you," she said. It was not a warning. It was a fact. "They have seen me before." He drove the 10 miles to Purgatory Flats. The town felt different. The air was thicker, charged with a malevolence he had not felt before. When he hitched the wagon outside the Mercantile, he saw Jeb Slocum across the street, talking to Cole and another rancher. They stopped talking when they saw him. They just watched. He walked inside. Mr. Harris, the proprietor, was weighing beans for a woman. He looked up, saw Elijah, and his face hardened. He finished with the woman, took her money, and then turned to Elijah. "What do you need?" It was not a question. 20 pounds of flour, 5 of salt, a gallon of oil, and a box of 10-penny nails. Mr. Harris turned, his back to Elijah. He gathered the items, his movements heavy and deliberate. He slammed them on the counter. $2, he said. "That's high, Mr. Harris. It was $1.50 last month." "Price went up," Harris said, his eyes cold. "You don't like it. You can go elsewhere." Elijah knew there was nowhere else to go. He slowly counted out the coins. He took his supplies and walked back out into the hard, bright sunlight. The street was quiet. Too quiet. Cole and the other men were gone. He loaded the flour and salt onto the wagon bed. As he reached back for the nails, a voice cut through the silence. "Hey, breed lover!" The voice was young, cracking. Elijah looked. 3 boys, none older than 15, were standing by the alley. Elijah ignored them. He picked up the box of nails. "Is it true you bed down with that dirty squaw?" "Elijah?" the same boy shouted. Elijah placed the nails in the wagon. He untied the reins. A rock flew. It was fast. It struck him high on the temple, sharp and brutal. Pain exploded in his head. He stumbled, his hand flying to the wound. He felt the warm, wet rush of blood. It ran down his skin, into his pale hair. He stood very still. He looked at the boy who had thrown it. The boy looked terrified, but also proud, puffed up by his own bravery. The men, Slocum and Cole, were watching again from the saloon window. Elijah said nothing. He did not shout. He did not move toward them. He held their gaze, his pale eyes flat, the blood running freely down his face. He let them look. He let them see what they had done. The boy's bravado broke. He looked away, shuffling his feet. Elijah turned his back to them. Slowly, deliberately, he climbed onto the wagon seat. He picked up the reins. He did not wipe the blood. He drove the wagon out of town, feeling the hatred on his back like the heat of the sun. Sani was waiting. She was standing by the corral when he drove up. She saw the blood from 50 yards away. Her body went rigid. She did not run to him. She waited, her face carved from stone. He stopped the wagon and climbed down. He was dizzy, the side of his face sticky and dark. She met him. Her eyes scanned the wound, then met his. She knew. She said nothing. She took his arm and led him inside. She pushed him gently onto the stool and went for the water bucket. She tore a strip from a clean rag. Her touch was not gentle. It was firm, efficient. She washed the crusted blood from his hair and skin, her fingers probing the cut. It was deep, but not terrible. "It will heal," she said, her voice low. She finished cleaning it. She stood back, the bloody rag in her hand. "I will leave," she said. Elijah looked up, his head aching. "What?" "They did this because of me. If I am gone, they will leave you be." She was not asking. She was telling him. She was preparing to survive again, to be the shadow in the canyons. Elijah reached out and grabbed her wrist. Not gently. He grabbed her hard. "No. You will be safe." "Elijah." "No." He stood up, his face close to hers. He was filled with a cold, quiet rage he had not known he possessed. "You came here. You asked me. You made a choice." He let go of her wrist and touched his own temple, where the cut was. "This is my choice." He held her gaze. "You came here by choice. Stay if you still want to." She searched his face, seeing the stubbornness, the fear, and the new, hard resolve. She saw a man who had finally drawn a line in the dust. She gave a single, slow nod. She would stay. That night, the attack changed them again. The anger of the town had sealed the cabin, making it the only safe place in the world. They lay on the cot, the small space a fortress. The lantern was out. The moonlight fell in a pale bar across the floor. Sani spoke into the darkness. Her voice was quiet. "When I came here," she said, "I told you I wanted a child. It was the truth." He waited. He knew there was more. "At the mission," she said, "they took everything. My name, my words, my gods, my body. There was nothing left of me. I was a cup they filled and emptied." He listened, his heart aching. "When I ran, I was empty. I was nothing. A ghost. I watched you. I saw you were empty. Too, I thought, a child. A child is something. It is a part of me. It is a future. It is a root. It is proof that I was here." She turned, her breath warm on his shoulder. "I don't want just a child. Elijah, I want something no one can take from me." He understood. She did not just want a baby. She wanted a legacy. She wanted to create something from her choice, not from their violence, something that would live, even if she did not. He was quiet for a long time. He was a simple man. He knew farm work and weather and the different kinds of silence. He did not know these words, these deep, tangled feelings. "Sani," he said, his voice halting. The words felt strange and heavy in his mouth. "When I go to town, when I am there, and they look at me, I am not afraid. Not anymore. I'm angry, but I am not afraid." He fumbled for the words. "And when I am on the wagon, coming home, I feel faster. I want to see the smoke from the chimney. I want to see you. When I see you, by the garden, or with the goats, my chest feels—" He stopped. He did not know the name for it. "I think," he whispered, "I might be falling in love with you. I don't know what to call it. It hurts. Like that cut, but it's not bad." He had confessed. He felt foolish. She was silent for a moment. Then she put her hand on his chest, over his heart. "You don't have to name a river," she said, her voice soft. "You only have to know it carries you." The town did not rest. The rumors grew, twisting into something monstrous. Jeb Slocum told men at the saloon that Elijah was not just keeping a squaw. He was arming her, that he had seen her with a rifle, that she was a spy for the Apache bands, plotting raids, that Elijah, broken by grief, had turned traitor. The hatred, which had been directed at him, now turned to her. The violence became sly and more dangerous. It happened a week after his trip to town. Sani was in the brush near the creek, checking the snares she kept for rabbits. It was dusk, the light thick and purple, shadows stretching long from the rocks. Elijah was in the barn, feeding the mules. He heard the sound, a sharp, metallic snap. It was followed by a cry, not a scream, a low, sharp cry of pain, instantly cut off. Elijah dropped the feed bucket. He was out of the barn in a second, running. "Sani!" He plunged into the thicket, toward the creek. He saw her. She was on the ground, half hidden by mesquite. Her leg. She was clutching her leg. He reached her, his heart pounding. A steel trap, a coyote trap, with the jagged, rusted teeth. It was snapped shut high on her calf, the metal teeth biting deep into her flesh. "God!" he breathed. It was not her snare. It had been hidden, buried in the path, covered with leaves. It was meant for her, or for him. She was not crying. Her face was pale, rigid with pain. Blood was welling up, dark and thick, soaking her deerskin skirt. "Hold on," he said, his voice shaking. He knelt, his hands grabbing the steel jaws. He planted his boot on the spring. He put all of his strength into it, his muscles screaming. The trap was old, the spring stiff with rust and disuse. He fought it. With a groan, the jaws opened. Sani pulled her leg free, a gasp tearing from her. Elijah threw the trap aside, hearing it clang against the rocks. He looked at her leg. It was bad. 2 deep punctures, bleeding heavily. "Can you stand?" She tried. She put weight on it and her face went white. She shook her head. The dusk was failing. The air was getting cold. The farm was 100 yards away, through thorns and brush. He did not hesitate. He scooped her up. He lifted her, his arms sliding under her back and knees. She was light, but solid. He started walking, carrying her. He crashed through the brush, ignoring the thorns that tore at his clothes and arms. He held her tight to his chest. She was quiet, her head resting on his shoulder. He could feel her blood. It was soaking his shirt, warm and wet, sticking to his skin. He held her tighter. He thought of the blood in the cabin, the blood of his wife that meant death. He thought of the blood on his temple, the blood of hatred. This was different. This was her blood. On him. It was the blood of a shared fight. He carried her through the gathering darkness, through the thorns and the rocks, his breath coming in ragged bursts. He carried her home, his heart pounding with a cold, protective fury. The world had come for her, and he had been too late. He would not be too late again. He carried her inside, his shirt soaked dark with her blood. He laid her on the cot, the clean white sheets a stark contrast to the grime of the attack. The cabin, which had become their sanctuary, now felt like a trap. He barred the door. He lit the lantern, his hands shaking, not with fear, but with a cold, precise rage. The trap's teeth had sunk deep into her calf. The 2 punctures were ragged, dark, and weeping. Sani was pale, her jaw set, but she did not make a sound as he brought the water basin and the whiskey. "This will burn," he said, his voice flat. "I have felt worse," she whispered. He cleaned the wound. His touch was rough, focused, his farmer's hands clumsy in their attempt at gentleness. He poured the whiskey over the raw flesh. Sani's entire body went rigid. Her knuckles turned white as she gripped the quilt, but she only let out a sharp hiss of breath. He tore strips from another clean sheet, Sarah's linen, and bound the leg. He worked in silence, the air in the cabin thick with the metallic smell of blood and the sharp fumes of the alcohol. When he was done, he sat back on the stool, exhausted. He looked at the bloody rags, at the trap he had thrown by the door, at her pale face. "They will come back," she said. It was not a question. "I know," he said. "They will not stop. Then I will stop them." For the next week, she was forced to be still. The leg was stiff, the wound angry and slow to heal. For Sani, who had survived by movement, the confinement was a different kind of torture. She watched him, her eyes following his every motion as he moved about the small space. Cooking, cleaning his rifle, reinforcing the door. They were in the cabin together. Day and night. The world shrank to those 4 walls. The silence, which had once been comfortable, was now heavy, filled with the unspoken threat of the outside. They talked more, not of the weather or the goats. They talked of what was next. "If they come," she said one afternoon, looking at the door, "you cannot fight them all. I have a rifle. I have the land. They have no right. They have rifles, too," she said simply. "And they believe they have every right. They believe you are the poison." "What would you have me do?" he asked, his frustration rising. "Run? Let them burn this? This is all I have. It's all that is left of her." "It is not just hers anymore," Sani said, looking at the cot she lay on. The words stopped him. He looked around the cabin, at her herbs, drying from a beam, at the small, tight balls of goat cheese wrapped in leaves on the shelf, at the bed, which they now shared. She was right. The house was no longer a tomb. It was a home. "What kind of life can we build here?" he asked, sitting at the table. his head in his hands. "Hiding, waiting for fire, waiting for traps. A life is built one day at a time," she said. "Today, we are here. My leg heals. You are safe. That is the life for today." He looked at her, at the strength he had mistaken for hardness. He felt a profound, aching need to give her something, some piece of his world that was not violence or fear. His eyes fell on the small, leather-bound Bible on the shelf. It was Sarah's, the only book in the house. He took it down. He opened it. The pages were thin, the letters dense. "I am not a learned man," he said, his voice hesitant. "I can read, but I am slow at it." He brought the book to the cot. "You are trapped here. You cannot work. I can teach you the letters." Sani looked at the book. A small, cold laugh escaped her. It was a bitter sound. "The white man's book," she said, touching the worn cover. "The men in black robes used this book. They held it up while they beat us. They said the words from it while they civilized us." Elijah's hand recoiled. He was about to close it. Ashamed. "I am sorry. I did not think. But," she said, stopping him. She put her hand over his. "They read from it. I never held it. I never knew the marks myself." Her eyes grew curious. "They said all their power was in these marks. I want to see this power." He looked at her, surprised. She was not afraid of it. She wanted to dismantle it, to understand it. So he sat by the bed, his large, rough finger pointing to the page. "This," he said, "is an A. It makes the sound, She watched, her focus intense. She learned faster than any child. She was not learning sounds. She was learning a code. Within 2 days, she could pick out letters. Within 3, she could spell her new name, Sani. He pointed to his own, Elijah. "Your name is from this book," she said, pointing to the text. "It is." "What does it mean?" "I do not know. It is just a name." She would not accept that. She made him hunt. He spent an hour, his fingers scanning the pages, until he found it, a name in a long list. "He was a prophet," Elijah said, squinting at the words. "A man who spoke to God. He brought fire from the sky, and he raised a boy from the dead." Sani looked at him, a faint, strange smile on her lips. You are the man who brings fire, and you raised a woman who was dead." Elijah stopped. He looked at his hands, then at her. He had never thought of it that way. "I am no prophet," he whispered. "I know," she said, and she let him continue the lesson. The peace of their small, literate world was shattered a few days later. Sani was walking, her limp pronounced, but she was mobile. She was outside, near the cabin, mending one of the goat pen fences. Elijah was on the porch, watching the horizon. He always watched the horizon now. He saw the dust first. 3 riders. "Inside," he said, his voice low and urgent. Sani did not hesitate. She slipped inside the cabin, taking the heavy water bucket with her. Elijah picked up his rifle. He did not level it. He just held it, the stock resting on his hip. He stood at the bottom of his porch steps and waited. The 3 townsmen rode up. It was Jeb Slocum. It was Cole, the rancher from the mercantile. And it was a 3rd man, a hard-case stranger with a pistol tied low on his hip, a man who looked like he was paid for his silence. They all had rifles, held loosely across their saddles. They stopped 20 yards from the porch. "Elijah," Slocum said, trying to sound neighborly. It failed. His eyes were shifty, nervous. Elijah said nothing. He just waited. "We just want to talk," Slocum said. "You're talking," Elijah replied. Cole spat into the dust. He was not nervous. He was angry. "This has to end. Elijah, the town's had enough." "What the town wants is no business of mine." "It is now," Cole snapped. "You're harboring a savage. You're arming her. You're turning against your own... that trap." "The trap you set," Elijah said. His voice was cold. It cut through the morning air. Slocum shifted. "Now, Elijah, nobody said who set it, but it was a warning you plain ignored." "She's a spy," Cole said, his hand resting on his rifle. "She's bringing her people down on us. We ain't gonna wait to get our throats cut in our beds. She is one woman, Elijah said. "And she is with me. You are wasting your time." "We ain't," the third man said. His voice was like gravel. "We're here to give you one last chance. You give us the squaw. We'll take her to the reservation. You stay here. We'll forget this ever happened." "No," Elijah said. "Don't be a fool, man." Slocum pleaded. "They're meeting about it. The whole town. They're scared. Scared men do rash things." "And I am not scared?" Elijah asked. He took one step forward. "You ride onto my land. You set traps for Sani. You threaten me. And you think I am the one who is a fool. Then you're a dead fool," Cole said, his voice rising. "We'll be back, Elijah, and when we come, we ain't gonna be talking. We will burn this farm to the ground. We will burn you out, like the rat you are." Elijah raised the rifle, just slightly. "Get off my land!" The stranger's eyes narrowed. Cole looked like he wanted to argue, but Elijah's stance was absolute. He was a pale, worn-down man, but he was rooted to that spot. He was not going to move. "You heard him," Slocum said, pulling his horse's head around. "He's made his choice." Cole stared at Elijah for a long, hateful moment. "You'll regret this, breed lover." They turned. They rode away. Elijah did not lower the rifle until they were a mile distant, just specks of dust. He went back inside, his hands trembling with adrenaline. He barred the door. Sani was standing by the stove. She had his old hunting knife in her hand. She had been ready. "They will come tonight," she said. Maybe tomorrow." He sat at the table, laying the rifle down. He put his head in his hands. The weight of the day, of the inevitable, crushed him. "I will not leave," she said, walking to him. "I will not run from them again." "We won't run," he said, his voice muffled. "I am tired of running. I am tired of being afraid." She put her hand on his shoulder. He took it, lacing his fingers with hers. They sat in silence as the sun began to set, the cabin growing dark. They were two people in a small wooden box, and the world was outside, trying to set it on fire. The threat did not break them. It fused them. That night, they did not just share the cot. The fear of death, the defiance of the world, had burned away the last of their ghosts. His memory of Sarah was not a barrier. It was a scar he carried, but it no longer ruled him. Her memory of violation was not a wall. It was the history that had forged her. He pulled her to him. This was not the hesitant, wounded joining of before. This was a claim. It was two people, cornered and condemned, choosing each other. It was fierce. It was desperate. It was, in its own raw way, a promise. They lay together in the darkness, their bodies slick with sweat, the sound of their breathing filling the small room. He held her, his arm protectively over her, as if he could shield her from the coming violence. She was quiet for a long time. Then she touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "This," she whispered, her voice fierce in the dark. "This is how a child should begin." He understood, not from a cold request, not from violence or fear, but from this, from a choice made in the face of the fire, a life created not in spite of death, but in defiance of it. He held her, and for the first time since Sarah, he did not pray for the sun to rise. He wanted the night to last forever. The mob did not come that night, or the next. A strange, terrible quiet settled on the farm. They worked, but every sound made them jump. A hawk's cry, a branch snapping. They were living on a razor's edge. They finished the garden. They sealed the barn for the winter that was still months away, but felt as if it were coming tomorrow. Then, one morning, perhaps 10 days after the standoff, Sani was standing by the willow tree. Elijah was near the creek, clearing the channel. He watched her. She was standing perfectly still, her hand resting on her stomach. He felt a cold lurch in his chest. He walked to her. "Sani." She did not turn. She just looked at the green, swaying branches of the tree, at the small, weathered cross beneath it. "I am late," she said. He did not understand. "Late for what?" "My moon," she said simply. "It has not come." He stared at her. He saw a new stillness in her, a new focus. She turned to face him. Her eyes were clear, and for the first time, he saw no fear in them, no anger, just a profound, quiet certainty. She did not cry. She did not smile. She just took his calloused hand and placed it on her flat stomach. "I think," she said, "it has begun." Elijah's world tilted. He looked at his hand, resting on her. He looked at her face. He looked at the grave of his wife and his stillborn son, just yards away, the place of his greatest failure. The terror rose in him, black and choking. He wanted to pull his hand away. He wanted to run. Death. It's death. I am poison. But he looked at Sani. She was not Sarah. She was not soft. She was not from back east. She was from this land. She was stone and root and hard, clear water. She was not afraid. A feeling broke inside him. It was a terrifying, fragile, and brilliant thing. A smile, hesitant and unsteady, broke across his face. It was the first true smile in 5 years. It felt radiant. He met her gaze. "Then we protect what we made," he said. The news that Elijah had not yielded, that he had chosen the Apache woman over his own people, hit Purgatory Flats like a sickness. Jeb Slocum, ashamed of being backed down, told the story with righteous anger. The town, already primed by fear and rumor, solidified. A meeting was held at the saloon. It was not a formal town meeting. It was a gathering of angry men. Mr. Harris from the Mercantile was there. Cole was there. Slocum was there. The quiet man with the tied-down pistol was there. Elijah was not invited. They drank. They talked. They spoke of civilization and purity and the dangers of the savage. They spoke of the land they had carved from the desert and the one man who was fouling it. By the end of the night, a decision had been made. That night, Elijah and Sani slept. They were exhausted, the emotional weight of their discovery pulling them into a deep, uneasy rest. Elijah woke first. He woke to the smell, a sharp, acrid smell, kerosene, and smoke. He was out of the cot in an instant. "Sani, wake up!" He ran to the window. The night was not dark. It was lit by a terrible, dancing, hungry orange. "The barn!" He ripped the door open. The barn, 50 yards away, was an inferno. Flames were already leaping from the roof, roaring into the night sky. "The mules!" he yelled. He ran, barefoot, toward the fire. The heat was a physical blow, hitting him 10 yards away. "Elijah!" Sani screamed from behind him. She was at the pump, frantically working the handle, trying to fill a bucket. He ignored her. He ran to the great barn doors. They were already smoking. He heard the mules. They were screaming, a high, frightened, terrible sound. He grabbed the handle. It was scorching. He cried out, pulling his hand back. He used his nightshirt, wrapping it around his hand, and pulled. The door was barred from the outside. "They locked them in," he whispered. Horrified, he saw the heavy beam dropped across the handles. He threw his shoulder against the door. It was solid. "Elijah, get back!" Sani was there, her leg dragging, throwing a pathetic splash of water from the bucket onto the wall. It turned to steam instantly. "The axe!" he roared. She understood. She ran to the woodpile. He saw them then, riders, 4 or 5 of them, on the ridge, silhouetted against the flames. They were watching. Sani returned, hauling the heavy splitting axe. He took it. He raised it. He swung. The wood was old, but it was thick. He swung again and again, putting all his grief, all his rage, all his terror into the blows. He was no prophet. He was just a man, fighting a fire. The bar cracked. He smashed it again. It broke. He tore the doors open. A wave of heat and smoke rolled out, throwing him back. The inside was a swirling, roaring hell. The 2 mules, mad with terror, bolted. They charged from the smoke, their eyes white, their manes singed. They galloped past him, past the cabin, and disappeared into the darkness. Elijah fell to his knees, coughing, his lungs burning. The hay was gone. The tools were gone. The structure was collapsing. Sani was beside him, pulling at his arm. "It is gone! Elijah, come away! It is gone!" He let her pull him back. They stood by the cabin, covered in soot, their faces lit by the massive, tragic fire. He watched the roof fall in, a shower of sparks rising to the black sky. They had not come for him. Not yet. They had come for his life. They had come for the barn. He looked at the figures on the ridge. They watched for another minute. Then, as if satisfied, they turned and rode away. The fire burned until dawn. They did not try to fight it. They stood by the cabin, Sani with her hand on her belly, Elijah with his empty hands at his sides, and watched his past turn to ash. The barn, his tools, the winter hay, the cradle he had built for Sarah's child. All of it was consumed. When the sun rose, all that remained was a square of smoking, blackened timber and the twisted metal of the hinges. The riders were long gone. The 2 mules had not returned. They were alone, truly. The burning of the barn was not an attack. It was an excommunication. The town had symbolically erased him. And in the silence of the following days, the child Sani carried became the center of that erasure. It was no longer just a child. It was a symbol to the town. It was a half-breed, a mark of sin, the living proof of his final betrayal. It was the physical manifestation of racial mixing, a disobedience to the unwritten laws that held purgatory flats together. It was a child conceived across a line they had all agreed to draw. To Elijah and Sani, it was something else. It was the only thing they had built that the fire could not touch. It was the future. It was the defiant, living thing made from their 2 griefs. But the future required food. The fire had taken their reserves. The garden was flourishing, but it was not enough. They were out of salt, flour, and oil. The mules were gone, so he could not even haul wood. "I have to go to town," Elijah said one morning, a week after the fire. Sani looked at him. Her eyes were hard. "They will not sell to you. I have coin. Mr. Harris is a businessman. He is a white man. Elijah. He was at the meeting." She touched the new, puckered scars on her calf. "This is what his business is now." "We cannot starve," he said. He took his rifle. "I will walk." It was 10 miles. He left at dawn and arrived just before noon, his boots coated in thick red dust, his shirt dark with sweat. He was exhausted before the confrontation even began. The town went silent when he walked onto the main street. It was as if he were a leper. Men on the boardwalk stopped talking. Women crossed the street to avoid him. He walked on, his eyes forward, the rifle held loosely in his hand. He entered the mercantile. "Mr. Harris was behind the counter. Cole was there, leaning against a barrel, and so was Jeb Slocum." Elijah stood before the counter. He could smell the sharp scent of pickles and the dry, dusty smell of canvas. "Mr. Harris," Elijah said, his voice dry. Harris just looked at him. He did not move. He did not speak. "I need flour," Elijah said. 20 pounds, and salt, and oil." Harris slowly wiped his hands on his apron. "I ain't got nothing for you, Elijah." "I have money," Elijah said, reaching into his pocket. "Your money ain't no good here. That's my flour, right there," Elijah said, nodding at the sacks stacked behind Harris. "That flour is for white folk," Cole said, pushing himself off the barrel. He was smiling, a mean, thin smile. "And you ain't quite white anymore. Are you, breed lover?" "I am not here for you, Cole," Elijah said, keeping his eyes on Harris. "Mr. Harris, I am asking to buy food." "And I'm telling you no," Harris said, his voice rising. "You're a blight. Elijah, you brought this on yourself. You bed down with a savage. You get treated like one. Now get out of my store." Elijah stood his ground. He looked at Slocum. "Jeb, you've known me 10 years. Slocum looked at the floor. He shuffled his feet. "You should have given her up. Elijah, you should have listened." Elijah looked back at Harris. He saw the finality in the man's eyes. There would be no food. He turned to leave. As he reached the door, Cole stepped in front of him. "Where you going in such a hurry? We ain't finished talking." Elijah tried to step around him. Cole spat. The glob of tobacco and saliva hit Elijah full on the cheek. It ran down, brown and stinging. Elijah stopped. He did not wipe it. He just looked at Cole. The cold, dead quietness in his eyes was the only thing holding the man back. "You're filth," Cole whispered. "You know what we do with filth like you. You know what we do with men who betray their own kind. Who poisoned the well?" He pointed to the large oak tree in the center of town. A heavy rope, left over from some long-forgotten hoist, was slung over a high branch. "That's a fine, strong branch," Cole said, his voice dropping. "It'd hold a man your size. It'd hold two. Maybe we should just get this over with. A rope for you, and one for your whore." Elijah's hand tightened on his rifle. "Try it," Elijah whispered. "Try it, Cole." For a second, the mercantile was absolutely still. Harris was pale. Even Cole's bravado wavered. He had pushed the hollow man, and he had found something solid and dangerous beneath. Cole stepped aside. Elijah walked out. He did not run. He walked down the center of the street, the spit drying on his face, the eyes of the entire town on his back. He did not look back. He walked the 10 miles home, arriving after dark, his hands empty, his face a mask of dried dirt and humiliation. Sani was waiting in the doorway. She saw his face in the moonlight. She saw his empty hands. He walked past her and sat at the table. He put his head in his hands. "They spat on me," he said, his voice muffled. "They threatened to hang me. They will not sell us food." Sani came and stood beside him. She said nothing. She let the silence stretch. Then she spoke, her voice flat and final. "We leave. Tonight." Elijah raised his head. "What?" "This is not a home. This is a cage. They will not stop. They burned the barn. Now they starve us. When we are weak, they will come with the rope." She was the pragmatist. She was the survivor. "We take what we can carry. We go to the canyons. I can keep us alive there. I can keep the child alive." Elijah looked at her. He looked around the small, poor cabin. He looked at the cot where his wife had died and where his child had been conceived. "No," he said. "No? You want to die here? Elijah? For what? For dust? For a piece of paper that says this land is yours? It is not yours. It is theirs. They have proven it." "No," he said again, his voice harder. He stood up. "If we run, they win. They take this from me, and I lose this land twice. I lost it once to grief. I will not lose it to them." He touched his chest. "I will not let them drive me out. This is my place." "It is your grave," she said. "Then it is my grave," he answered. "But I will not run." A tense, terrible quiet descended on the farm. They rationed their food. They ate the garden greens, the goat cheese. Sani snared rabbits in the brush, but she never went far. Elijah worked, repairing the corral, but his eyes were always on the ridge. They were 2 weeks from starvation when the rider came. It was not a mob. It was a single man, riding hard. Elijah had the rifle on him before he was halfway to the cabin. "Hold up, Elijah!" the man yelled. "I'm alone. I'm coming in peace." Elijah recognized him. Silas Croft, an old man, even older than Elijah, who lived on a small claim north of town. He was a veteran of the war, a man who had lost a leg at Shiloh and who spent most of his time drinking and telling stories no one wanted to hear. He was, in his own way, as much an outcast as Elijah. Silas rode up, his wooden legs strapped awkwardly to the saddle. He looked nervous, his eyes darting around. "You're a damn fool, Elijah," Silas said, not dismounting. "But you ain't a bad man. I had to come." "Come for what, Silas?" "I was at the saloon, listening." They ain't talking anymore. Eli, they're planning. Cole's got them riled up. They're saying you're a danger, that the Apache woman is a witch. They're talking about tonight." "They've come before," Elijah said. "Not like this, not with this much whiskey in 'em. They ain't just coming to burn a barn. They're coming with tar and a rope. They're talking about cleansing the place. They mean to kill you, Elijah, and her, and God help them. They're talking about the baby." Elijah's blood went cold. "You gotta run," Silas said, his voice dropping. "I know you're stubborn, but you can't fight 20 men. They'll be here after moonrise. You take her and you run. Go south. Don't look back." The old veteran pulled his horse around. "I never saw you. I was never here." He kicked his horse and galloped away, a lone figure disappearing into the dust. Elijah turned and went into the cabin. Sani had heard. Her face was grim. "The canyons?" she said. "No," Elijah said. "Not the canyons. They'll expect that. They'll hunt us." He looked at the floor, at the small, square door that led to the root cellar. "They will come for us in the house, but we will not be in it." For the rest of the day, they worked with a silent, frantic energy. Elijah went into the root cellar. It was a small, 3-foot-deep pit, dug into the hard earth beneath the cabin, smelling of damp and old potatoes. With a spade, he began to dig. He dug at the far wall, the one that faced away from the barn, toward the creek. The work was brutal. The earth was packed hard. He sweated, he cursed, his muscles burned. He was not digging a tunnel. He was digging a foxhole, a burrow. He dug a narrow passage, just wide enough for them to crawl through, heading for the deep, overgrown ditch that led to the creek bed. While he dug, Sani prepared. She was fierce. She was focused. She gathered what was left of their food: goat cheese, dried rabbit, a small bag of cornmeal. She filled 2 canteens with water. She packed the bandages, the knife, and a small tin of matches. She wrapped it all in a tight, neat bundle. Last, she took the Bible. She looked at it for a long moment. The white man's book of power. She placed it in the bundle. By the time the sun set, the tunnel was finished. It was a dark, narrow hole, barely 5 feet long, opening up into the tangled thorns of the gully. He covered the opening with a loose pile of brush. Inside the cabin, he put the cellar door back in place. He sprinkled dirt over it, just as it had been. They did not light the lantern. They sat in the dark, the bundle at their feet. Sani had the rifle. Elijah had the axe. They waited. The moon rose, a pale, sickly crescent. And then they heard it, the sound of many horses, the jingle of harnesses. Low, drunken voices. Elijah looked through a crack in the window. The field was full of them. At least 15, maybe 20 men, and they carried torches. The night was lit by a dozen moving, angry stars. They formed a wide, loose circle around the small cabin. "Elijah!" Cole's voice roared, thick with whiskey. "Come on out. Elijah, we're here for the party." A few men laughed. A bottle smashed. "We know you're in there. Traitor, send out your squaw. We got a present for her." Elijah looked at Sani. She was pale, but her hand was steady on the rifle. "Down," he whispered. "Into the cellar. Now." "I will fight with you," she said. "No, you will go. You will take this." He pushed the bundle at her. "Go to the creek. If I am not there by dawn, you run. I will not leave you. You will. You will save the child. That is the only thing that matters. Go. That is my choice." She looked at him, her eyes blazing in the dark. She wanted to argue, but she saw the finality in his face. She had made her choice in the field. He was making his on the porch. She nodded. She lifted the cellar door. "Elijah!" The voice was closer. A gunshot exploded, a warning shot. The bullet ripped through the cabin wall, splintering wood, whistling past Elijah's head. Sani dropped into the dark hole. "Now," Elijah whispered. She disappeared. He slid the door back, covering the hole. He stood up. He took a deep breath. He put the axe down. "You want me, Cole?" he shouted, his voice cracking. "Come on out, lover, or we burn this one, too." Elijah unbarred the door. He stepped out onto the porch. He was alone. He raised his hands, empty, into the torchlight. The men fell silent. They stared at this pale, worn-out man, blinking in the sudden light. He looked pathetic. He looked like a victim. Elijah stood there, trembling, but he held his ground. He looked at them. He saw Cole and Sani and Mr. Harris. He saw faces he had known for a decade. He spoke. His voice was halting at first, but it grew stronger. "This land," he said, his voice carrying in the sudden, awful quiet. "This land, You all know what it took from me." He pointed, his hand shaking, toward the willow tree, its branches black against the torchlight. "I buried my wife out there. Sarah, I buried her. And I buried my son. I buried my own life. I did not die. But I was dead." He looked at them, meeting their eyes one by one. "I was a ghost. For 5 years. You all saw it. You saw me, and you looked away. You left me here to rot." The men shifted. They looked uncomfortable. This was not the confession they had come for. "And then she came," Elijah said, his voice rising. "Someone you hate, someone you fear, someone you call savage. You call her dirty." His gaze found Cole. "You call her savage, but I was the one who was dead. She brought me back." He took a step forward, his hands still raised. "She came, and she saved me. She woke me up. She taught me how to live again, and the life we made, the life that is inside this house. It is more real and more clean than all of your hate." "Blasphemy!" Harris shrieked. "He's lost his mind." "She brought me back," Elijah roared, his voice breaking with a desperate, terrible honesty. "And you will not take her." There was a moment of pure, stunned silence. Cole raised his pistol. "You're a dead man. Elijah." A gunshot rang out. It was not from Cole. It came from the side. A flash, a bang. Elijah felt a line of fire sear his arm. It was a graze, but it felt like a hot iron. He cried out, more in shock than pain, and ducked, stumbling back. Chaos erupted. The men surged forward, yelling. They thought he was reaching for a gun. Another shot exploded. It was louder. A rifle. It came from the second-story window. Sani had not gone to the creek. She had gone through the cellar, out the tunnel, and had circled back. She had climbed the old, rickety ladder to the small attic window. She had not fired in the air. One of the riders, the quiet man, the hard-case stranger, cried out, a high, surprise sound. He clutched his shoulder and toppled sideways from his horse. He hit the ground and did not move. The mob froze. They stared at the fallen man. They looked up at the dark window. They had come for a victim. They had come to hang a broken farmer and his squaw. They had found a prophet, and they had found a warrior. The rifle shot, from an unseen place, was terrifying. The squaw was armed, and she was not afraid to shoot. Cole looked at the man on the ground. He looked at the cabin. The whiskey courage was gone, replaced by a cold, sudden fear. "He's hit! Get him! Get him up!" Slocum yelled, his voice a panicked squeak. Two men scrambled to lift the fallen rider. The circle broke. Men were pulling their horses around, bumping into each other, their bravado shattered. "We'll be back!" Cole screamed, but it was a hollow threat. "We'll be back for you, you witch!" He fired his pistol, wildly, toward the window, but they were already in retreat. They galloped away, a broken, terrified rabble, carrying their wounded, leaving a trail of dropped torches and empty bottles. The field went dark. The only sound was the thud of retreating hoofbeats and the faint, low moaning of the man they were carrying. Elijah was on the porch, clutching his bleeding arm. The world was spinning. He looked up. In the small, dark square of the attic window, he saw Sani's silhouette, the long, dark line of the rifle barrel, smoke curling from its tip. The silence of the desert rushed back in, heavy and complete. They had won. For now, the silence that followed the retreat was louder than the gunshots. In the field, dropped torches guttered in the dust, casting twitching, dying shadows. The only human sound was the faint, distant moaning of the man Sani had shot, growing quieter as the mob fled. Elijah was on his knees, his hand clamped to his bleeding arm. The pain was a dull, hot throb. He looked at the blood on his fingers, dark in the moonlight, and felt a strange, cold calm. He had faced them. He was still here. He heard the scrape of the ladder. Sani emerged from the side of the house, the rifle held in one hand. She moved with a purpose, her limp barely noticeable, her face a mask of stone. She did not run to him. She walked, scanning the dark horizon, checking that the threat was truly gone. She reached the porch and finally looked at him. She saw the blood. She knelt, putting the rifle down. Her eyes examined the wound. It was a long, ugly graze, a furrow of skin torn from his forearm. "It is not deep," she said. "You shot him," he said, his voice dazed. "He was going to kill you." She said it as a simple fact. She tore a strip from her own skirt and began to bind his arm, her movements quick and tight. "Others will come." "Not tonight," he said. But they both knew this was not an end. It was a turning point. They had drawn blood. They had won the battle, but in doing so, they had lost the war. The sheriff arrived just after dawn. He was alone. Sheriff Brody was a man who wore his weariness like a second skin. He had been sheriff for 20 years, and he had seen enough hate, greed, and stupidity to last him 3 lifetimes. He rode up, his horse stopping just short of the burned-out shell of the barn. He looked at the littered field, at the dark, dried patch of blood in the dust. He looked at Elijah, standing on the porch with his arm in a sling. He looked at Sani, who stood just inside the doorway, the rifle leaning against the wall, her hand on her belly. "Morning, Elijah," Brody said, not dismounting. He nodded to Sani. "Ma'am." "Sheriff," Elijah said. "Looks like you had a hard night." "They came for us, Brody, 20 men. They burned the barn last week. They came to kill us last night." "I see that," Brody said, rubbing his jaw. "And you fired back. They fired first." "That ain't how they're telling it," the sheriff said, his voice flat. "They're telling it that they came to talk, and your squaw ambushed them from the attic. Shot Hank Miller clean through the shoulder. He'll live, but he'll never use that arm again." "They were a mob, Brody. They came with torches and ropes." Sheriff Brody let out a long, slow breath. He looked at the ground. "Elijah, I'm going to be plain. I don't much care what the truth is. The truth don't matter in Purgatory Flats. Not anymore. What matters is that Cole and Slocum have the town so riled up they taste blood. They say you're harboring a murderer. They say she's a savage, and you're a traitor." He finally looked Elijah in the eye. "I came here as a courtesy. I'm the law. But I've got 3 deputies, and the town has 50 angry men. I cannot protect you. So you're going to let them hang us," Elijah said, his voice cold. "I'm telling you," Brody said, "that I'm officially washing my hands of this. As of this moment, your claim is outside my jurisdiction. I will not stop them from coming back, and I will not arrest them for what they do when they come." He pointed a finger at Elijah. "You are on your own. My advice, be gone by nightfall, because I can't stop them. And God help me, I don't think I want to try." The sheriff turned his horse. He did not say goodbye. He just rode away, a solitary, defeated man, leaving them to their fate. Elijah stood on the porch for a long time, watching the dust settle. He looked at the grave under the willow. He looked at the black patch of ash that was his barn. He looked at the cabin, his fortress, now just a wooden box waiting to be burned. He had said he would not run. He had said he would not lose this land twice. He had been a fool. His pride was a luxury he could no longer afford. He was not just protecting himself. He turned and went inside. Sani was watching him. She had the bundle she had packed the night before sitting on the table. He did not have to say the words. She saw it in his eyes. He walked to the table and put his good hand on top of hers, on top of her belly. "We will not be here by nightfall," he said. He had not lost the land. He was trading it. He was trading the past for the future. They worked quickly. There was little to take. The bundle Sani had packed held everything they needed to survive: food, water, the knife, the Bible. She took the remaining goat cheese. Elijah took his axe and the rifle. He looked around the small cabin, the only home he had known. He went to the small, scorched chest that held what was left of Sarah's things. He opened it. On top lay a small, tin-framed photograph. The glass cracked. It was his wedding picture. He and Sarah, young, stiff, hopeful, standing outside a church back east. He had saved it from the barn fire, a single salvaged relic. He picked it up. He looked at the pale, smiling face of the woman he had loved and failed. He could not take her with him. This new life, this desperate flight, had no room for her ghost. He could not leave her here for Cole or Harris to find and mock. He took the photograph outside. Sani watched him, her face impassive, but her eyes soft. He walked to the willow tree. He knelt by the simple wooden cross that marked Sarah's grave. With his good hand, he dug a small, neat hole in the soft earth at the base of the marker. He looked at the picture one last time. "Goodbye, Sarah," he whispered. He placed the tin frame in the hole. He covered it with dirt. He was burying his first life. He was saying goodbye to the man he had been, the hollow man who had lived in grief. He stood up. He felt lighter. He turned to Sani. He was ready. They did not wait for moonlight. They left in the hard, hot light of midday. They did not take the road. Elijah unbarred the door one last time. He did not look back. Sani led the way. She took him through the tunnel he had dug, into the gully, and down into the dry creek bed. They moved south, into the harsh, unforgiving expanse of the canyon lands. They followed the shadows of the rocks, moving quickly, putting distance between themselves and the hate that was following them. The land was a new kind of enemy. It was vast, red, and indifferent. The sun was a hammer. Water was scarce, found only in the muddy seeps Sani knew how to find. They traveled mostly at night, hiding during the heat of the day in shallow caves or under the overhang of a cliff. Elijah was a farmer. He was lost in this red maze. But Sani was home. She had been born of this land. She taught him how to walk without sound, how to read the signs of the animals, how to find water. He was the student. She was the master. They were hunted. Not by men, though the fear of them was constant. They were hunted by memory, and by the terrain itself. Weeks passed. They moved deeper, toward the border, away from any known settlement. Sani's body began to change. Her morning sickness was a quiet, violent trial, endured without complaint. Her belly, flat and hard, began to swell, a small, firm curve that grew more pronounced with each passing week. It was no longer an idea. It was a visible promise. Elijah would watch her, his heart caught between terror and a fierce, protective joy. He would see her resting, her hand on her stomach, and he knew they were walking for a reason. They were exhausted, their food gone, the water in their canteens a foul, warm memory. When they found the mission, it rose from the desert like a ghost, a great, crumbling adobe church. Its bell tower collapsed, its roof open to the sky. It had been abandoned for half a century. Elijah saw only a ruin. Sani saw sanctuary. She led him to the back, to the old priest's quarters. The walls were 3 feet thick. The roof, made of heavy tile, was mostly intact. One room was perfect. It had a solid wooden door, bleached gray by the sun, and a deep corner fireplace. In the courtyard, choked with weeds, was a stone well. Elijah lowered the bucket. He heard, faintly, a splash. He pulled it up. The water was dark, but it was clean. They were safe. They did not rest. They prepared. This was their new land. Sani, even in her advancing pregnancy, was tireless. She searched the surrounding hills. She came back with dried herbs, with roots, with a knowledge that astounded him. She found yarrow for fever, thyme for seasoning, and a plant she called osha, which she said would be for the birth. Elijah, the farmer, found his purpose. In the corner of the courtyard, protected by a high wall, was a patch of earth. It was dry, but the well was close. He dug. He worked the soil, pulling the weeds, turning it over and over, his hands finding their old rhythm. He planted the few seeds Sani had carried, the hardy squash, the corn. He planted the seeds he had carried in his own pocket, salvaged from his ruined garden. He watered it, and he waited. The months passed. The desert sun gave way to a brief, sharp winter. The rains came. The small garden gave them squash and beans. Sani snared rabbits. Elijah patched the roof. They lived in their one solid room. the fire their only companion. Her time came in the dead of winter, during a cold, howling rainstorm. The labor was long. It started at dusk. By midnight, Sani was in the grip of it, her body racked with a pain that stole her breath. Elijah was terrified. The room was dark, lit only by the flickering fire. The rain lashed the windows. It was all too familiar. He was back in the cabin, the smell of blood in the air. Sarah's hand going limp in his. He was shaking, his face pale and slick with sweat. "I can't," he whispered, backing away. "Sani, I can't. I bring death." Sani, in the midst of a contraction, grabbed his hand. Her grip was not a plea. It was a command. It was iron. "You will not," she gritted out, her eyes blazing. "She is not him. I am not her. Stay, stay, Elijah." He stayed. He held her hand. He wiped her face. He was no longer a farmer. He was no longer a widower. He was a partner. She labored with a fierce, primal strength. She did not scream as Sarah had. She roared. She fought for this child, her body warring with itself, as the first pale gray light of dawn filtered through the window. The fight was over. A new sound filled the room. Not a scream of pain, but a cry, a loud, sharp, angry wail. This time, death did not come. This time, there was only life. Elijah, his hands shaking so badly he could barely function, took the child. It was a girl. She was small, covered in blood and life, her face screwed up in a furious complaint at the cold. New world. She had a full head of thick, black hair. He wrapped her in the cleanest cloth they had, a piece of Sarah's linen, saved for this moment. He held his daughter. He looked at her perfect, tiny fingers, at the way her mouth rooted, searching, and the ice that had gripped his heart for more than 5 years. The ice of his grief, his guilt, and his failure finally broke. He sank to his knees, his shoulders shaking. He wept. He held his daughter to his chest and sobbed. Great, tearing sounds of a man who had forgotten how to cry. He wept for Sarah. He wept for the lost boy. He wept for the farm, and the fire, and the hate, and he wept for this impossible, beautiful miracle. Sani watched him, her body exhausted, her face luminous. She smiled, a weak, triumphant smile. She reached out, her finger tracing the baby's dark hair. Elijah looked at her, his eyes unseeable, his heart so full he could not speak. Sani whispered, her voice hoarse, but clear as a bell. She was made from wanting. The West did not change. It remained a vast, hard country, full of stone and sky, promise and violence. It was still a place that broke people, that judged them, that drew lines in the dust. But they had. Years later, there was a small, dusty village near the border. It was not on any map. It was a place of adobe and wood, a place where the lines had blurred. An older man, his hair the color of dried straw, knelt in a patch of dry soil. He was surrounded by children, a mix of brown and white faces, all watching him. He was showing them how to plant corn, his large, calloused hands gentle as he pressed a seed into the earth. His face was no longer hollow. It was lined, and it was content. Elijah, the farmer, was now a teacher, in a small, clean room filled with the sharp, clean scent of drying herbs. An older woman sat. Her black hair was streaked with silver, her face a map of wisdom. She was binding the hand of an old woman, her touch firm and knowing. Sani, the survivor, was now a healer. A girl of about 7 ran through the village square, laughing, her bare feet kicking up dust. She was chasing a stray dog, her movements fluid and free. She had her mother's copper skin and her father's pale, clear blue eyes. She stopped, waving to the man in the garden. He waved back, a slow smile spreading across his face. She turned and waved to the woman in the window. The woman nodded, her face calm and proud. Their child, born of sorrow and choice, ran free. She belonged to both worlds, and she was afraid of neither. What they had built, forged in pain and fire, could not be taken. Thank you for listening to our story. We would love to know where in the world you are listening from. So please leave a comment. Be sure to subscribe to From Wild West for more stories like this one. And finally, Let us know your thoughts on Elijah and Sani's journey in English. We look forward to reading what you have to say.